Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a Connecting to Healing interview. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Kelly Bramblett. Thank you so much for joining me, Kelly.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor.
Thank you. Yes, this is super exciting. I love sharing other people's healing journeys. And that's actually the first question. Tell us a little bit about your own healing journey. What brought you into what you're doing now?
Wow. So I'm like, how far back do I want to go? So I have a history of abuse, and I always like to give a little trigger warning here because this is a little intense. So I do talk about sexual abuse and some rape sometimes when I tell my story, but I like to offer that trigger warning there because I know that can be sensitive for some people who are, in a real tender place with those types of things, that type of content. But my story kind of began as far as the wounding aspect. When I was very young, I was sexually molested by a neighbor, by my friend's brother, basically a neighbor, when I was about in the fourth grade. And, it was only once, it only happened one time, but the whole experience was just really strange and obviously very confusing at being so young at that time. And nothing really was ever done about this except for her parents kind of accused me of lying, and she wasn't allowed to be around me anymore. And it was almost in this young age, it made me feel like by saying something, I had done something wrong. So I started creating a lot of stories in that space of it's not safe for me to talk about these things with people because look what had happened. I had lost my friend and people were blaming me. And somehow there's already so much shame, right, associated with this. And then you kind of have the adults almost blaming you or not believing you. And it just really added to that shame. So that kind of placed a shadow over things growing up, even though it was just that one incident. It was very impactful. And I really also started telling a story at a really young age that men are dangerous, men can't be trusted, and that I attract unhealthy men. I mean, from a very young age, I had this story that men gave me inappropriate attention because that's kind of what I had learned through that experience. And, as I was thinking these things growing up, these things became my truth more and more. And at 15, I was sent away. My parents at that time felt like I was going down a bad path. They had read some stuff in a journal about a woman that I was seeing, or a girl, we were kids. So a girl that I was dating at the time, which really kind of sent them over the edge. And they sent me to live with a family member who was quite fanatical. It was my aunt and her husband, and their religious beliefs were very fanatical. There was a lot of racism involved, a lot of things I wasn't used to, having to practice laws from the Old Testament, things like washing each other's feet and ceremonial stuff and keeping a Sabbath and not celebrating the holidays I had always celebrated and celebrating all these new holidays. And a part of their belief was they also believed in multiple wives. So from the second I got there, her husband was 57 years old. I was 15. He began grooming me right away. So it started with fear tactics. If you contact anyone, they cut me off from everyone that I had known in school. And they said, if you contact anyone, I'm going to tie you up and I'll beat you in the backyard. So that was the punishment. There was a lot of fear. And he went from that to, I'm the only person that loves you. Look, I'm the only one who's willing to take care of you. Your parents don't want you. Nobody else wants you. So it was very classic. As I've grown up and started learning about trauma and these types of things, this is very classic grooming techniques. At the time, of course, I didn't realize that. And he ended up getting me addicted to pills, addicted to alcohol. During the course of all this, I was being drugged pretty consistently while I was there. Muscle relaxers and alcohol and all kinds of things were being fed to me. And by the time it was all said and done, I was there about 1.5 years, 2 years. It gets a little blurry, but it was around that time because I ended up coming home around the age of 17. I was completely brainwashed at this point. I got to a point where I almost had a unhealthy worship of this man. I would follow him around and sit at his feet even. It was just a really intense situation. And when I finally got out of that situation, there was a whole lot of confusion around it, right? Because it was obviously abusive, But by the time I had left, I was a willing participant, even though it didn't start out that way. In time, it was that way. So it was very confusing for me to understand, like, was I abused? And I went through a lot of my life not really acknowledging the fact that that was abuse, and there was rape involved in that situation when I was unconscious. So there was a lot of abuse, but because all those wires were crossed between everything, it was very confusing. And it was kind of one of these things we never talked about in my family. Like, there was the initial kind of discussion and upset about it when me and my aunt actually left that situation together. But after that, it was just never talked about and never dealt with, not by my family, not by myself. So I went on and I kind of began spiraling. That's what I call the downward spiral of unresolved wounding. I didn't deal with any of this stuff. And so I continued to create more trauma for myself. I continued to be in abusive relationships. It's funny because a lot of people in my first book, Alchemy of the Phoenix, I talk a lot about the abuse that I experienced living with my aunt and uncle. But a lot of people don't realize some of the most severe abuse and trauma I experienced came those 20 years following. When I was, like I said, in these abusive relationships, I was addicted to drugs. I was addicted to meth at one point. Pretty much I would put anything in my body. It was just complete self-sabotage. I really believed that there was no hope left for me. At this point, I had been married, divorced. My children weren't with me any longer. They were with their father. They never got taken away, but it was like, I did have the good sense to know that I wasn't in any state of mind for them. And so we together chose that he would be the better option. And I'm very thankful that it never came to court or anything like that. And so they were always in my life. It was just that they didn't live with me, but I was always very thankful for that, at least. But yeah, it was 20 years of just complete darkness and chaos and more trauma and more self-sabotage. And, during all this time, there was this constant calling of like wanting to get healthy, right? We're always kind of being called back to that, I believe. But like I said there, I had so many feelings of worthlessness, and I really did feel like I just want to get this life over with. Like, this one's a wash. I just want to get it over with and start fresh, like better luck next time kind of attitude. And that really kept me stuck. Okay. The hopelessness kept me stuck, feeling like there is no hope. Why should I even try? And so, but every once in a while, I would kind of try to get it together. And it was very much like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I would give up the alcohol and I would do great for a few months. And it was seeming like things were going to go well. But the truth is, because I was just focusing on the manifestation of all my pain, like the drinking, but I was never addressing these root issues and getting to the actual cause of like, why do I feel like I need to escape so often? I was just really dealing with the escapism by itself. And so it was never sustainable, because those old wounds, something would trigger me or something would happen. And it was back to my old habits of let me numb out, let me not feel this. So there was always this pulling, something trying to get me there, but I was missing this key piece. And I remember in 2016, I was journaling and I was in a rock bottom time of life. Once again, I was with a very abusive partner. I was drinking really heavily, and I was writing affirmations, and I was kind of going into almost automatic writing where the words were just kind of flowing. And across the page of my journal, the words came across that said, I deserve to be happy. And it's such a simple statement. And it even gets me emotional when I talk about it now, because something about seeing those words written in front of me, something switched in me, and I literally dropped to the ground and I just started almost wailing. So much release, crying, wailing, screaming. It was sounds that I had never heard myself make before, so guttural. And I just knew in that moment that I was like, this is it. I'm not going to make it like this. Like, I have to do something. I was well in my 30s at this point. And I said, that's it. Like, I made a commitment. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't even know where to start or what to do, but like, I do deserve to be happy, and I will fight tooth and nail for that happiness. And that began my journey of self-discovery and healing, which has eventually brought me to where I am now over the years of doing my own healing and just kind of aligning with such wonderful opportunities. And then, doing a lot of studying and getting my certifications in trauma care and coaching and law of attraction and all these other certifications I've gone on to get. And so now I love my life, every second of it. I'm extremely joyous. I share the story as often as I can because I know that there are a lot of other people out there who feel hopeless. And so my motto is always that I'm here to give hope to the hopeless because I know what it's like to be there and I know what it's like to be in that space. And so, yeah, that's kind of my story and what brought me to now helping lead other women through their own trauma and past abuse, mostly.
Wow, what a story. I have actually a few similarities. I was molested at 11, raped at 15, and then actually raped again at 29. These were date rapes. It was boyfriends, but at the time I didn't know any better and I didn't really question it and I didn't press back and I didn't ask for help, like none of it. And so I've had my own healing journey as a result.
Yeah.
And it's been quite a journey just coming to this place where I just want to share healing practices and show people that there's a way. There's a way out of the darkness. There's a way out of the struggle. There's a way out of the pain and the trauma. Like we can actually do the work in this lifetime. We don't have to give up and start over, right? We can choose.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing about it is, and I think it takes a while, like this isn't necessarily something I would ever say to someone who was like newly going through one of these experiences that we're talking about.
Right.
But the really beautiful thing is that as you get on this journey, as you start upon this journey, and begin the healing, you begin to look at your experiences so differently. You really shift out of that victim mode to, believe it or not, and I'm sure you probably can resonate with this, a space of gratitude. Because I just look back and think, like, if these things would not have happened, like these things were horrible and tragic and painful, but they birthed my entire purpose. So without those experiences, I wouldn't be able to do what I love to do so much now. And so I think in time, we're able to embrace those experiences and still do it in a really loving way, which is, I know, hard to understand for some people, but I think, like I said, that the longer you're on this journey, the more you kind of put those pieces together.
Definitely. In fact, during the pandemic, I got gratitude on my arm, which I don't know if you can actually read it.
I can, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, because I needed a reminder. I was kind of in that, like, too much isolation, too much, like, just not dealing with my life. Yeah. And it's like, wait a minute, I know this skill. I've used it for so long. I just needed a reminder.
What a perfect place to put it there, because you can just glance anytime you need that reminder.
I have the Om symbol on the other side. Both of these are reminders. So then, what is your professional background? Did you end up going to university or any of like the higher education stuff, or did you just kind of end up in all of these beautiful certifications?
So no, I never did. And kind of what started this journey for me was I entered a contest a couple of years ago. I want to say 2019. Like I said, time kind of starts to lose like its meaning like around this time, but around 2019, there's a woman that I follow and still do. Her name is Emma Mumford. I don't know if you've heard of her. She's very popular in the UK, especially huge UK following. She's known as the manifestation queen, or the spiritual queen, actually. And, she was a big part of my spiritual journey. I started listening to her podcast. It was just making these small changes right towards healing. And so I would walk my daughter to school every morning, and on the way back, I would listen to her podcast. So that's kind of how she came into my life. And one morning she posted something that said, "Do you want to be a spiritual author?" And every single hair on my body stood up. Wow. I'd never considered writing a book before, but I was like, okay, Spirit, I'm listening. Like, okay. So I reached out to her and I said, I'm interested, still having no clue, like, what am I even going to write about? And she said, okay, great. Get a book proposal put together and get it back turned into me. And I'm sitting there like Googling, how do I even do a book proposal? Like, I have no idea. Okay. So anyways, I kind of get my bearings around that. And I said a short prayer and I was like, God, if this is something you truly want me to do, that I'm meant to do, tell me what you want me to write about. And within an hour, I had the entire book of Alchemy of the Phoenix, the entire outline in my head. And it was just clear as day. Like, obviously I need to talk about this traumatic experience. And that was the first time I'd ever talked about it at all. So it was such medicine for myself as well. But as I was writing that book about trauma, having no experience in trauma other than my own, like I was not trauma informed at the time. And that book is really written in that way too. I definitely do not come across as being an expert. It's kind of like, here's my story in the first part, and here's the things that worked for me, and these may work for you or they may not. Like, here's what worked for me. If it helps, great. If it doesn't, then, let it go, whatever. So the book was very much written in that vein. But as I was writing the book, I just realized that I wanted to have more information. It's really what got me started on feeling like I wanted to begin working with other people in this capacity. So from there, I got a life coaching certification, a law of attraction practitioner certification, and then eventually went on to get my trauma specialist certification as well. Kind of stumbling over my words a little bit there, but and then also I got all my Reiki certifications because I really love to bring in that work as well. I think it's such a beautiful way of helping people cope with trauma in a really non-confrontational way. I'm able just to kind of say, hey, not only are you going to receive this beautiful energy medicine, but it's also a time for you to carve for some self-care as well with my clients. So yeah, that's kind of how I went about getting all these certifications and became really inspired to do this work.
That's wonderful. And so when did your coaching business officially begin? Was it around like 2019, 2020?
I'd say I started trying around 2020. And I mean, I think with these things, like with all things, it was really discouraging at times because like I had no clients for the longest time. Like I had 0 clients and I just kept believing. I was like, I know that this is what I'm meant to do. I didn't give up. I just kept with it. And then eventually, things really started to explode in time. And I think it all happens in perfect timing as well, because I don't necessarily think I was quite ready then. I was kind of dipping my toes in. I was teaching online classes. I was doing like group stuff. But I think everything really unfolded in, like I said, in perfect timing when I was actually ready to stand in that position. So it's been, a few years, but it's hard to say exactly. But yeah, I really started working towards that goal in about 2020.
Awesome. So what are the specific products and services that you offer right now?
So I offer a couple of different, and I only offer coaching and coaching packages. This is something I learned along the way. We were kind of talking about this before we started recording, but so much learning happened along this process of kind of getting to where I am now. And initially I was offering one-on-one, one-off sessions. And I was like, no, when you're dealing with trauma work, it just can't be done in an hour. It just cannot be.
Yeah, it's time.
It's the layering, right? And the process of it. So I offer a couple of different packages, but truly they're all the same. I mean, I say this all the time, like, because once I sit with someone, it's really, I decide then like, are we going to focus more on trauma recovery? Do we need to focus more on mindset work? Do we need to focus more on spiritualism? I'm a very spiritual person as well. And that's not always a part of my coaching. I can just do plain personal development, but I do always love being able to bring in those spiritual aspects because I think it's so impactful. So basically I offer trauma recovery and mindset coaching, law of attraction, just to make it a little bit easier. But like I said, there's no one size fits all. Everyone's different. Everyone's needs are different. So I'm pretty good at kind of like creating a program for each individual. And then the other thing that I'm offering right now, which has been really exciting, and this just kind of happened. It's another thing that just kind of happened on its own, but I'm offering a trauma care certification course. So that's a 10-week course that I'm offering where the people that I work with end up with a nice certification. They're trauma informed by the end of it. And I think what really inspired me to begin this program was that coaching right now is saturated and trauma recovery stuff has become very popularized. So I just started seeing so many coaches kind of jumping on this bandwagon of wanting to do this trauma recovery, but unfortunately a lot of them weren't trauma informed. And it's like, I just felt like so much damage was being done to the nervous system. People are being re-traumatized. Like, I can't tell you how many stories I've heard of women who have gone to coaches or healers and come out of it more traumatized than they went in, because they simply didn't know what they were doing. And so I was like, okay, well, we need people doing this work, and it's important work, because who doesn't have trauma, right? We all have it.
Yeah, it's a part of our existence as humans.
Right. And so it's like, how can I somehow share everything that I've learned over the years, all this information that I've accumulated and put into my own coaching, which I've seen such beautiful results with my own clients. And I created this 10-week program. So it's heavily based on the type of trauma care that I was taught, which is like a forward-facing way of treating trauma, which means we don't do a lot of verbal processing. While there's this traditional way of verbally processing everything that we see in a lot of traditional therapy, it's not working. People are going in with a dysregulated nervous system, and they're being forced to confront these things over and over, and their body's receiving it as if it's happening all over again, and they're becoming re-traumatized. So it's heavily focused on nervous system work. And then within that, I kind of break it down into the 3 pillars that I work with, which is mindset, radical self-acceptance, and forgiveness of self and others. So it's kind of a mixture of like that nervous system work. And this is my coaching as well. But in this certification course, I actually teach my 8-week program. So my students go on and they have like exactly the foundation that I use with my own coaching clients. And I've been having a lot of fun doing that. I'm working with about 3 people right now. It is something I do one-on-one. Initially, I was going to launch it as a group class. But what I found is with the women that I'm working with, they go through the 8-week program themselves as well, kind of, if that makes sense. I want them to experience it from both sides. So I found that like during this, like I'm teaching, but we're also doing a lot of coaching with them as well. So I just felt like the program runs really beautifully just doing one-on-one. So that's kind of how I've decided to move forward. So that's kind of what I'm offering right now. And then a bunch of little stuff on the side, as always, little projects. I have a retreat coming up here next year, and I certify people for Reiki 1 and 2. So with a bunch of little stuff sprinkled in, I would say.
Nice. Okay. Well, and we talked about the framework, so you've got that covered. What beliefs underpin your coaching?
What beliefs? What was
you mentioned forgiveness of self and others.
So basically, yeah, those are the pillars that I work with. And like I was saying, it's really based on nervous system, getting the nervous system in order before we even touch any trauma stuff. And I know some of my clients get so frustrated that first session because they're like, hey, I'm here to talk about my limiting beliefs, and you're just trying to teach me how to relax my body. And I'm like, we will get to it, but I won't move forward until we kind of have that self-regulation down, so that as we begin diving into these deeper issues, they're doing it in a relaxed body that's able to receive that information in a really healthy way.
They have the tools that they need to do it.
Yeah. Awesome. And then, like I said, and it all kind of runs into each other, then there's mindset, and mindset is the undercurrent of everything else I said, which is, that radical self-acceptance and self-love. When we've been traumatized, especially abuse victims, especially abuse survivors that experienced abuse in childhood, we tend to carry a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of confusion. And a lot of times, the saying, which is so true, hurt people, right? Like I experienced what I did. And then I have these children now who are grown, but at the time when they were smaller, were then dealing with an alcoholic drug addict mother as well. So now they have their trauma. And it was really hard for me to forgive myself for that. And so I think too, it's like, not only about, that's why it's like forgiveness of self and others, because yes, we need to forgive the people that harmed us, but a lot of times we've gone on to do so much harm that we're walking, and it's just compounded our self-loathing, right? So it's really focused on like radically accepting ourselves and just saying like, yes, I did these really awful things. And yes, it wasn't ideal, but I can make a new choice today, and I'm going to choose to be a better person than I was yesterday. And realizing that we don't have to carry the burden of every single mistake we've made, that we can say, all right, I'm choosing differently. And so from here on forward, I choose to be gentle with myself. I choose to love myself despite my imperfections, because we're all imperfect. right? So we all need to extend that radical self-love to ourselves.
Definitely. Yeah, so then you mentioned a lot of what you do is one-on-one. What is it like to be coached by you? So you go through the nervous system training.
I would say being coached by me is not for the faint of heart. This is one
Ah,
thing. I do a discovery call with every potential client to make sure we're going to be a vibrational match, because what I tell people is I am not a space holder. Like, if you want a space holder, go find a good therapist. They'll hold space for you for 10 years plus if you want, and they'll listen to you day in and day out, and they'll take your money for it for as long as you'll pay them. I'm not a space holder, so I'm very action oriented, so working with me means you're going to be doing a lot of work. You're going to be needing to carve out time. You're going to learn how to prioritize yourself guilt-free and your healing without feeling guilty. You're not going to be putting yourself on the back burner any longer when you work with me. And like I said, I know this always sounds harsh when I say this, but I'm not great with like what I call wallowing. Like, we all have trauma, and there's a lot of people, and I think this is a normal part of the healing process. I've definitely been there too. So when I say this, there's no judgment in it. But for the people who are kind of just wanting to talk endlessly about their trauma and kind of, poor me, woe is me, I'm a victim. Like, I want to move people away and out of feeling victimized and into a place of empowerment. And so anyone who's not willing to take that journey is not going to be a good fit for my coaching style. So I basically like to say, like, if I'm here for the people who are really serious, just like I was in 2016, for those people who are willing to fight tooth and nail for their joyfulness, and anything less of that, then I'm probably not the best fit.
well, I think that's important, because as coaches, we need to be working with people that really need us instead of the ones that are just going to go kind of half-assed.
Yeah.
I've never appreciated those clients either.
I let them go, honestly, in a heartbeat, as much as hard as it is. But it's like, hey, like, at this point, you're wasting your money and my time. So like, I'm not willing to do either one of those things if it's not working out,
Okay, so how do you know when you're doing a good job? Do you ask for feedback? Do you get reviews, testimonials, or this is healing work that you're doing. So
all of the above. At the end of every single session, I always say, do you have questions, concerns, anything we need to address? So, I definitely create a safe space. And even in my intake paperwork, it's like, ultimately the client is in the driver's seat. Like, I'm here to offer you stuff. And if it's not working, I'm always like, well, let's pivot then. Let's try something different. Let's try these tools then, because there's just different things that work for everyone, right? And so the feedback is actually super important, because it lets me know, okay, like, we need to adjust what we're doing. We maybe need to reevaluate the plan thus far, et cetera. So I keep that open line of communication with my clients. And I feel like my clients become, honestly, almost like I fall in love with every single one of them, almost, to be honest with you. I really do. I have deep love for them. I become really invested in their success and their lives. And I feel like I do create a space that's really comfortable when something doesn't resonate, for them to say, hey, actually, Kelly, like, this isn't working for me, or this doesn't feel right for me. And I take my cues from them. And like I said, pivot. But then, of course, there's always the reviews, the feedback, the testimonials, which are always like just the best thing, right? Just the best, most validating thing to receive. So
definitely. Well, so then you've kind of been doing this business for a few years now. What have you learned about running a business?
It's hard.
It's hard. Also, not for the faint of heart, right?
That's what I was going to say. Exactly. Like, what I've learned is that you have to be determined. You have to be very confident in your goals and your mission, because if you're waiting for other people to validate you, you're going to get stopped right there in your tracks. So you have to have a lot of like inner validation and belief in your purpose, I think, I mean, I don't know about any business. I can only speak to the type of business I run,
Right.
which again is very spiritually based. So, I mean, there's a lot of faith involved in that. But, you know, like I said at the beginning, there was times when I was sobbing my eyes out and I would just be like, universe, like, why are you bringing me to this space? And yet it feels like I'm moving uphill. And it was just still needing to do some mindset work and my own work, right? To release some of these beliefs before things really started to pick up. But I think that's the most important thing I've learned, is that if you're really determined, things will happen. And one thing I always say too is, like, for me, of course, this is my livelihood. Yes, it is a business, but you know, I was telling someone the other day, I've known and worked with some people that, like, you invite them to be on your podcast, or you invite them and they're like, well, how many listeners do you have? How many downloads do you have? What's your following? And I've been determined that I will never be that way, because for me, I feel like if just one person hears something that I say that makes a difference, then I'm doing good work in the world. I don't need 100 or thousands of people, even though I hope that happens. That would be great. Like, I would love to have that platform. But I think when you're really doing this work for the right reasons, the business and the money part just comes after. But I think as long as you stay focused on really what the true point of all this is, you know, which is to help inspire people. And like I said, if it's just one person, I feel like I've done good work, you know.
Love it. Well, that's the end of the questions. So just one thing. You have a book that you just released, and I have a copy of it. I was so excited to receive. Can you talk a little bit about your book?
Yeah, so I have it sitting right here. It's going to be backwards for you guys, but there you go. It's the Shadow Work Journal and Guide for Beginners, an Introduction to Discovering and Healing Your Unconscious Self. So the name is pretty self-explanatory. It's a really little short book packed full of really gentle shadow work exercises, along with kind of like an introduction to what is shadow work, why shadow work is so important, why we don't need to be afraid of shadow work. And I really do address too, like, shadow work has become such a buzzword lately. It's so popular. I get it. But with that, there's a lot of like misrepresentation of what it is too. Like, I've heard people say some crazy stuff about shadow work, and I'm like, none of that none of that is what it is. So the shadow work journal is really based on kind of like Jungian analysis and theory, basically. So this is not such a spiritual book. It's more psychological, I would say, than it is spiritual. But yeah, it's processes and journal prompts and activities to kind of gently guide people through their shadow work process in a really safe and comfortable, and more importantly, fun and enjoyable way. Like, yes, shadow work is kind of a drag. Yes, it's hard to look at these pieces of ourselves and address like things that we may not find pleasing, or confront our past painful experiences, but we can still make it fun, believe it or not. And so that's kind of like my mission in writing these books, is to show that, like, yes, this work is hard and it can be painful, but it doesn't mean we can't have fun doing it still.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, great. And so how can people find you? Where do you prefer people to reach you?
The probably easiest way for people to find is like my website, which is kind of the hub for everything. Like, you can find my podcast, my books, my weekly blog. Like, you can find literally everything there, including my services, any classes that I'm offering. And that website is just www.kellybramblett.com. So it's really easy, just my first and last name. And then, of course, I'm all over social media. You can search Kelly Bramblett on any social media platform and find me there as well. So really just searching my name, even just throwing my name in a Google search, is going to pull up all of those platforms as well. So really easy to find, super accessible. And even from my website, on every page, there's a contact form for anyone who wants to reach out to me directly. It sends it straight to my email address. So I'm really easy to get a hold of.
Awesome. Okay. Any final thoughts you'd like to leave with the listeners?
just to love yourself and keep doing what you're doing. I know this journey can be hard. I know it can feel overwhelming, but I think if there's, like I said, any message that I'm constantly trying to impress upon people is that, first of all, you're worth it. And second of all, there is always hope. There is no single human being on this earth, and I really don't care what their story is. There's not a single human being that can't find redemption, that can't find forgiveness, and that can't find healing.
Beautiful. Cool. Well, thank you, Kelly. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.